Thank you for joining us in Philanthropy at the Speed of Trust. I'm pleased to introduce your facilitators today. Christine Gale, NCF Impact Coordinator based in North Platte. Kara Weander Gaster, Affiliated Fund Development Coordinator for Northeast Nebraska. And our technical producer today is Chief Operating Officer Casey Balitz. I'm Denise Gary, Affiliated Fund Development Coordinator in Southwest Nebraska, and I'd like to just take a quick moment to thank all of our veterans for their service, especially today as we celebrate Veterans Day. Today, you will have the opportunity to learn from several dynamic fund advisory committee members on how they develop trust within their communities that truly strengthens their grant-making process. Trust me, you're going to have a positive experience and expand your network through today's session. To start our interaction, we're going to send you into breakout rooms where you will meet other participants and discuss what this statement means to you. Relationships are built at the speed of trust. You'll have around 6 minutes to share your thoughts on this very powerful statement. And some of you may be familiar with this from our asset-based community development discussions. Casey, please send everyone to their breakout groups. I'm complete.
For coming back to the big room. Hopefully you all had a chance to reflect on the statement of change happens along the lines of relationships and at the speed of trust. And you've probably come to the conclusion that trust and relationships are very important, and relationships are involved in everything that we do, whether it's fundraising or grant making, working with leaders, helping to build leaders, collaboration, any of our work, the success depends on our relationships. And trust is a key ingredient to relationships. But trust can be seen differently from a number of different people. Some people may see trust as assumed, and others may see trust as earned. And there really isn't a right or wrong way of how to perceive trust, but it certainly does play how people trust in how well the relationship goes. So knowing how someone trusts is very important. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that in this session. And we're also going to give you a little bit of background about trust and philanthropy before we hear some of the fantastic community stories that we have for you, where people can actually share examples of the work that they're doing in this area of trust and philanthropy and in their grant making. So you've heard us talk a lot about asset-based community development, and hopefully you now have a pretty good idea of what that approach is. It is definitely a tool in the work that we do, but it's also how we build relationships. So this little slide helps kind of explain that a little bit more of, and I know you've seen this slide before, but when people are discovering from each other, it's through conversations. And you've heard me talk a lot about meaningful conversations and the importance of really listening and reaching out to people and talking with them about what they want to see in their future. And by doing that, you're building relationships and you're building trust. And so the second one is, while you're having those meaningful conversations, you're discovering their talents and their gifts, and you're discovering their assets. You're also discovering their dreams and maybe some common dreams and common goals that you have. And so by doing that, you're joining together and connecting with them and continuing that relationship to another level. So by building power together, you're collaborating and partnering, which you've heard us talk a lot about. And finally, the reason we do all that is because working together is more successful, and it helps us address problems, but also realize our dreams. And you heard us talk a lot about that last night. So that's how ABCD work fits within our relationship approach to community development. So as you can see, bringing it all together, that relationships, endowment, and community development all go hand in hand. But they really do take patience and tenacity. So many times I personally have wanted to just do things myself just to get it done. Or it is much easier to just have one organization think of something that they want to do, know the process that they want to go through to get it done, and just do it. And there is some success in that, but there will be more success and more long-term success if we actually take the time to bring others along. And obviously, what we mean by that is by being open to bringing new people into our group who's working together, making sure that we take the time to build those relationships and to build that trust and to listen to ideas along the way. And Jeff talked a little bit about it last night about being open to maybe changing our path just a little bit and being flexible as we bring more and more people into the process. It gets messy, but it definitely is the recipe for success down the road. So trust is created by open, honest, transparent, being genuine, being a good listener. There's lots of characteristics of trust. And a key part of building trust is being clear on our values and our vision and our mission. And many of you have heard us talk about that. That is our framework, our vision, mission, and value statements of our affiliated funds. And why those are so important is because you want to make sure that you as an organization, as a committee, that you are all bought into what you stand for. And those values, mission, and vision statements really help share to the community what you represent and what you stand for. But they also share with the community the kind of culture that you're trying to build. And so that's why we spend a lot of time talking about our vision, mission, and values and how they should be used in our daily work, whether we're fundraising or grant making. Overarching values and trust-based relationships are cultivating relationships with mutual benefit. We say that because when you're granting, there is an imbalance of power that just automatically occurs. When you are the funding organization or you have the money and you have the ability to decide if something is granted to or not, there's a power to that. And vice versa, obviously, the grantee, the organization who is asking for funds, is coming to you to ask for that grant. And so there is a little bit of a natural imbalance. So what we are asking you is, as a funding organization or as an affiliated fund, to share that power with those who are asking for the grant and to share that empowerment in the community. And there's lots of different ways that you can do that. And so that is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to give you a little bit of background about some of these ways that you can build trust in grant making and sharing that power. And then we're going to hear from some communities who are actually going to demonstrate how they're using those. So Casey, we'll go to the next slide and we'll talk about the first one, which is doing your homework. You've heard us talk about this. We've used the example of some of the communities who have done impact planning already. But doing the homework is proactively learning about your community and not expecting the grantee to come and tell you everything that's going on with that particular issue or idea. But instead, you're aware of your community. You're aware of the trends that are happening, of the data. You've had lots of conversations with different organizations and different leaders. You've maybe even talked to some of the beneficiaries of some of the grants that have gone on in your communities, and you know how it's helping or not fulfilling their needs, that you actually have some hands-on information that you have proactively gone out into your community and learned yourself. And that demonstrates trust because it's showing that you truly do care about the future of your community and you're not just sitting back and wanting to be spoon-fed the information. The second one is simplifying and streamlining the application process. We've talked a lot about proactive grant making, and when you have the opportunity to see that there is a need or something, there's a great idea that you'd like to start, you can develop that from the beginning with partners in your community. But we're not suggesting that you need to get rid of your application completely. There is a place for applications, but we just want you to consider to be flexible, to be able to not put up barriers for grantees through your application or your application process. Artificial deadlines sometimes get in the way if someone really needs to get a grant at a certain time, but it doesn't happen to be in your granting cycle time period. Maybe be a little flexible about that. Those are organizational rules that you've made yourself, so you can certainly be flexible if the need arises. The third one is be transparent and responsive, and this gets back to that framework I was talking about. By sharing your vision, mission, and your values, and really being upfront of exactly what you stand for and what you want to grant to, what you will not grant to, is really important to share with your community upfront. And we just suggest that obviously the IRS has given us certain rules that we absolutely can't use this philanthropic money for. But there are things that you as an organization have maybe decided that you would put as a higher priority over others. Please share that information in your community and be as transparent as you can. That will build trust because they won't be surprised by anything. So now I'm going to pass it over to Denise and let her share a couple of the other ways that you can build trust in your grant making process.
This is Denise, and a fourth area of trust is to consider providing unrestricted funding for multiple years. You may know of an organization that is developing a new project or program, but they have several unknowns. Having funding that can be spent in multiple years without restrictions allows them to focus on the success of the project and take out some of their risk. Consider this research and development funding. It takes our trust as an FAC to allow organizations this flexibility. Another way is to offer support beyond the checkbook. And there are many ways to be supportive of an organization besides the money. Connecting resources and collaboration with other community and statewide partners could be really vital. Build their confidence, lift up their progress to the public and other funders. Involving organizations and staff in leadership development opportunities through the NCF network. And one of my favorites, become a sounding board for big dreams. I'm complete. Kara, on to you.
Thanks, Denise. So I'm going to go over a couple. Number 6 is solicit and act on feedback. So that's pretty simple, right? We're asking you to simply speak with your grantee organizations and ask them how it was to work with your FAC. Ask them how the process was. But the really important part here is not only asking, but then truly listening and then acting on that. So one of the ways you could break trust is by asking for input and then ignoring it, right? So if you asked folks, you need to listen and then be willing to act on that. Or to be able to answer their question, right? You don't have to do everything they ask, but you have to be able to tell them why you've made those decisions. Again, back to that mission, vision, value. Number 7, skip the formal report and have a conversation instead. So this is kind of that same concept. Sit down and have a conversation with those who are involved in the grant. So for those of us who've written grants or received grants, right, you always have that final report you have to do at the end. So instead of just having that form, actually having the conversation, asking them, how did it go? Were there any surprises, right? This is a really much more dynamic way to be in conversation and communication and engage your grantees and perhaps be able to help them. So with those, building your relationship is also super important. Through all of these, having the conversation and building that relationship. All right, thank you. That is number 7. I am going to turn it back over.
Thanks, Kara. So we did have a question in the chat box that I'd love to just take a moment to go over, and that is to explain a little bit the unrestricted in the word of number 4, the unrestricted multi-year funding. And that's a great question, Ken. I'm so glad that you brought it up. I'll just take a second to kind of clarify that. But yes, by having trust in the organization who is the expert in the area that they are trying to work on, whether it's an idea or towards a program or problem, you are saying in a multi-year grant that you trust that they are the experts and that they know the best way to address those problems or those issues, and that you are giving them money for this year and on into second and maybe third year, maybe longer, but because they can make those decisions and make adjustments as they need. So the unrestricted piece of that is obviously there is a designation for that grant of what it's supposed to be used for. But if something changes, like for instance, during COVID, maybe someone had a grant that they had for after school programs, but then COVID hit and they could no longer gather in an after school setting together. And so instead they had to move to virtual, and they maybe had to change their programming a bit. By them maybe using that money a little bit differently, but still doing the purpose of the grant, you're allowing them to make those decisions for themselves and not have to come back to you for every little thing and say, hey, is it okay if we do this? Is it okay if we do that? That's how sharing that power works. And obviously it's a give and take, and it's a building of a relationship. It's trust. You want accountability. We are not suggesting that you should not have accountability with the grantees, but just to give them a little bit of leeway to make the decisions that are good for their organization. So hopefully that helped with that. I would like to introduce one of our first speakers, who is also from Keith County. Pam Abbott is the chair of the Keith County Community Fund, and Keith County, as you all have heard through many of the sessions, they have been working very hard on how they can make impactful grants in their community, because they have been blessed with a very generous gift that increased their endowment greatly. So they have the capacity to give and really make a difference. So we're going to hear from Pam next to share how they are really getting to know their community and doing their homework. Pam?
Thank you, Christine. Thanks for the opportunity to share about how we're building relationships as well. And like Christine said, it's no secret that Keith County's dreams were definitely unleashed when we received our big multi-million-dollar gift last year of over $8 million. We realize we have the potential for big change to occur in Keith County, and that whatever we do, the community needs to be by our side in the process. So we decided together, we first needed to learn what it is that we don't know about our county's communities. And we did a data dig. There is no definite order that you see here that on the screen, but hang on here. I'm just trying to get back to my screen here. For some reason, it won't let me do that on my notes.
Go up to the top, Pam, and you should be able to say exit full screen.
I am trying to do that, but it won't let me do that for some reason. There we go. So again, in no special order, let's see, where was I? We wanted to do that data dig, and in order to make a difference, we knew we needed to help connect more dots and not assume that we knew everything about our county. The data educated us better about our people and our economy and the well-being and education of our kids too. And we had some real eye-opening pieces that we never would have guessed, or quite simply, we just underestimated. Again, there's no particular order to what you're seeing there, but some of the examples of the surprises that we had were, we had a 24% increase in the pre-retirement age group. And that's people between the ages of 50 and 69. Now, that in-migration of pre-retirement ages is really atypical to most communities in greater Nebraska. So we ask ourselves, who are these people? And how does that translate to their spending habits? And where are they living? And what are they looking for in housing? And in addition, the degree of the influence of our retirees, having been the single largest generator of household earnings, which is at $135 million annually, stopped us in our tracks. Also, our inbound commuters, and I want you to think people working in Keith County, but living outside Keith County, was the fourth largest economic driver, which was more than $22 million annually. So what would make them want to live in Keith County? And how much of that earned income is spent outside the county? Now, like most of us across the state, we know that we have a housing need. What we didn't know, though, was that 80% of our housing is anticipated to turn over in the next 20 years. So what opportunities are we missing there? With our children, 39, almost 40% of our households are single parent households here in our county. And so how does that translate to our childcare needs? We have a gap for affordable childcare to the tune of about 183 slots countywide for birth to 5-year-olds. But how can we increase that capacity affordably? Well, following this data dig, we shared the findings with our community members in 3 separate visioning sessions between February and June. And I think it's important to note that we met generations where they're at in their lives for those pieces. Our evening in-person February meeting generally sampled community members over age 50, while our noon hour virtual meetings in June captured primarily ages 25 to 50. And interestingly, there was consensus at the end of the 3 vision sessions that supported focus, especially in housing, early childhood, and downtown revitalization. Since those visioning sessions, our partners in economic development have conducted open-ended invitation community gatherings virtually. And those virtual gatherings are specific to each focus area. Now remember, when it's personal, it's important. And when it's important, it gets done. We've done asset mapping to make sure that we're looking at the abundance that we currently have. And that includes the work currently underway. And then building upon those pieces, allowing space for more dreams to occur during those conversations. Allowing continued contextual questions for people who might not be up to speed as well as others, and even some problem solving. For example, since the end of September, our community gathering conversations in early childhood have advocated for and produced a charter drafted for a market analysis for early childcare in our area by a couple of community members that step forward, who have skills, they have talents in the area of evaluation. I think it's important to point out that the key, or perhaps the art to those community conversations, is knowing when to move forward and when to just continue to allow more space for those conversations to continue. COVID has certainly reminded us to be flexible in that area and be patient. Christine mentioned this earlier. We all want that quick and easy big win, but we are taking our cues here from the discussions, because ultimately we want to create a shared vision that's powerful enough to inspire and engage more community members. That's part of our ABC development. Some groups might be ready to act, but if they haven't brought the community alongside with them, they might feel a little bit more dragged to their efforts going forward. So now our FAC is beginning deeper conversations about accountability. And often we overlook that accountability piece in trust-based philanthropy. How can we be leaders helping organizations analyze the impact that they're having with the philanthropic dollars that they're receiving? We all want the change to be impactful and sustainable to our areas. And in general, this helps us move from more of a mercy grant giving position to a justice centered position that helps to further develop the organizations we're giving to. Now, that said, COVID-19 happens. We know this now, right? And it reminds us that we do have to stay flexible and community focused in our ongoing discussions and decisions of what we do. So all in all, collectively, we've helped our engaged community members reframe that bigger picture. And there's still room for improvement in that piece, but we really are acting our way into thinking differently. And most importantly, we're moving our community along with us by doing so.
Thanks, Pam. That was really great to hear what Keith County is doing and learning more about your community. So we've thrown a lot of information at all of you, but we would like to have a breakout now where you can discuss a little bit of what you've heard. The question that you're going to be answering in your breakout is, who do we need to talk to learn more about our community? So we're just going to give you a few minutes to talk amongst yourselves of who, now that you've been thinking this over, who do you need to bring into the loop to learn more? If Casey will send us to our breakouts, that would be great.
This is Denise, and I hope that you enjoyed your conversation. And this is really a great time to explore these new ideas. NCF encourages fund advisory committees to proactively grant to organizations because they're having regular conversations within their community and they know what is needed. I've watched the Eustis Area Fund Advisory Committee for several years operate without a grant application. And today I'd like to introduce you to Troy Ruda, the chair of the Fund Advisory Committee in Eustis, and have him share a little bit about how they operate and how they've accomplished so many things within Eustis. Troy, I'm complete.
Hello, everyone. Denise, thanks for having me, everybody. Denise asked me, she said, do you want to come on here and talk a little bit? I'm like, okay, sure, I'll do my best, right? It was interesting to me when we started talking about the grant application stuff. I kind of looked starry-eyed at her just a little bit and said, well, we really don't have that application process. It's more just interacting with the people. We try to be proactive about going out and talking to different people, take their ideas, come back. It's just an informal interaction for us, I guess. And we've really done very well. I'm proud to say we had a wellness center get proposed to the community, and that was all verbal. Kind of went to the community, went to other organizations, and next thing you know, I'll probably fumble this just a little bit, but a little over a year, we've raised a little over right at $700,000, I guess, and put that wellness center in reality. And if you guys have watched some of the foundation videos that have been out there, you know, I think Alan Reeker, another one of our members, said it best. You know, it's all coming true. I'm new to the foundation board, and when you start seeing it all come together, I think the community all of a sudden sees what's going on, and you get more talk in the community about what's going on.
And Troy, could you share just a little bit about, you guys have done some visioning sessions. Sometimes they're thank yous that bring the community together, and you ask them for some of their input.
Right. So one of the big things that I found that we needed to do was inform the community of what we've done. So come out and invite the public to come in, and let's talk about all the projects that we've done. Not only that, but step further and say, what would you guys like to see? So when you start hearing those ideas, you start picking out, okay, what do you keep hearing? Denise, we were in that meeting, you were there too, you know, we had like 4 topics that kept coming up. So you take those and focus on them and try to be reactive. I think just a little bit ago, one of our presenters said, be ready to react on those requests and thoughts. And so that's what we really try to do here in Eustis, and it's really paid off for us.
So you just have another project that had been simmering kind of at the edges for an electronic sign, but you guys are known for partnering with other people. Could you just share a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So one of the ideas that had kind of been floating around were, what if we had a marquee sign out in front, kind of out by the highway, if anybody's familiar with Eustis, so passerbys plus our community could post things out there. So with the help of private donations and then our Chamber of Commerce in town, our FUI organization, I apologize if I'm going to leave anybody out, but we raised enough money to do that. The beautiful thing about it is we kind of put the wellness center project to bed. It became a realization, right? The building got built, everything came together on that. We stepped on to the next project, and I'm going to say in probably 3 months, the sign came together. So we are on track to have a sign built, I'm hoping somewhere before spring. We'll have a nice marquee sign. It's 20 feet tall, I believe 12 feet wide, the sign area, and then about 6 feet tall there. So nice display area for everyone to use within the community. And it's not just our sign, it's the community's sign. It's everyone's. So we've had a lot of help.
Did you see the question from Lauren in the chat box for Troy?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
Go ahead and say it,
Kristen. Okay. Troy, this is a really good question that I'd love to get your feedback too. Lauren asks that they have a fear that without an application, they may fall into a rut where board members' pet projects are funded by virtue of who's out talking to different organizations. How do you ensure that you're being responsive and not preferential to the interests of people on your committee?
So that's a very good question. We have approached it without the application process and found that that is kind of helpful in the fact that sometimes when people have to fill out an application, they're a little bit resistant or just don't follow through with that. So we're finding it better to approach our way. I understand your thoughts on that, to where, there might be some favoritism out there towards a project, to the participation in the people that are talking. But at this point in time, I really feel that we're approaching it in a very good way. Now, that's not to say we won't look at, maybe we should have an application process. The main things that I would like to see when somebody comes and requests for a project is I want to answer some simple questions: the who, what, when, where, why, and how. And they're pretty basic, right? If you start thinking, what's my project? Who's it involved? Where is it coming from? Why? Do we need it? There's always got a problem to fulfill a need. And so that's where we come from on it.
And I can just say, from observing them in action, is that very rarely is there just one person who's reporting back, for example, about the, how is the childcare doing? A couple people will say, we'll find out about that, or others already know information. That it's a very connected group, and they do come from actually a very young, I would say over half of their FAC members are under the age of 45. And there are sometimes assignments given then at the FAC meetings where it'll, if there's more information that's needed, it's usually done through a fund advisory committee member to go search and get more information. And they have also held meetings at places to see some of them. I know I've had a tour of their childcare center that was in the basement of one of their meeting halls, and they do incorporate some of their meetings at the places that they are giving funds to, like the senior center and such, also that gives them a chance to interact with some of the folks. So there's 401 people in Eustis, and I would say they have done an exceptional job of including a lot of different voices through those fund advisory committee members. Does that help answer that question?
I think that's great. Let's send them into their next breakout.
That sounds great. Your next question is, what are the benefits of working together on grants up front in your community? Have a great conversation. Let's do a quick little applause for our speakers so far. Thank you, Troy and Pam. In some of our grant making opportunities, your support and leadership as a fund advisory committee can make a project even more successful. Collaboration and convening are tools for FACs that can elevate a project by bringing people together for deeper conversations. One of the most talented people in this arena is Andy Long, McCook FAC member and executive director of McCook Economic Development Corporation. Andy's going to share with us today a positive example of support beyond writing the check. Andy, take it away.
Denise, I wish you'd introduce me as, oh, he might be okay. We'll see there, because then the expectations are a little bit lower. But, really what I want to talk about is, I think it's kind of my love letter to Cindy Huff, who's our FAC president in McCook. But it was about 2.5 years ago where the hospital came to economic development and said, every time one of our employees has a baby, we lose them. There are no spots. And there are other major employers that had the same story. The childcare providers knew it for years beforehand. We just hadn't bothered to ask them, but it became a point where it was an urgent need for our community. And so through the connections we had, we reached out, connected with Nebraska Children's and Family Foundation. And if early childhood is a challenge in your community, you got to contact Nebraska Children's and Families Foundation. They are the experts. But they helped us set up a Community for Kids committee in Red Willow County for McCook. And we reached out to Extension, ESU, the community college, the major employers, and also the FAC. And Cindy Huff joined this Community for Kids team. And for those of you that don't know Cindy, she is a force. She's our FAC president. She's on the NCF board. She's a former superintendent. She helps schools do superintendent searches now. She comes with a wide range of knowledges and experience from a variety of places. So just by having her a part of that group, we have her knowledge, we have her connections, we have her relationships. And one of the biggest things for me is we have her encouragement. And that's been huge. As a small town economic developer, I'm a commercial landlord, I'm a residential landlord, I'm a business recruiter, I'm an early childhood education recruiter. I run the Keystone Business Center. We own business park land. We own some residential land out by an apartment complex. I've got about 15 to 20 things on my plate all the time. It is tough for me to be the champion of everything. And so when Cindy's there and she's also an additional challenge, it keeps me motivated. It keeps me going. First Five Nebraska does a lot of promotional work around early childhood education. And they reached out to the Community for Kids and say, we need 2 people from each community to participate in our Policy Leadership Academy. And I'm the Community for Kids coordinator. I'm just like, there's no way I can fit this into my schedule. And so I threw it out to our Community for Kids team. And Cindy goes, I would love to do this. And so now she's not just an advocate for us locally, but she's an advocate on the statewide level. In that encouragement, that involvement, that has been huge for us. If you look at it, your small town leaders are struggling right now. Your superintendents are under a ton of stress, not just with regular school stuff, but with keeping their kids and staff healthy. As FAC members, we are weavers, we are connectors. We need to be reaching out to them. And I'll tell you, the expanding the school bells, those grants were great. But right now, they might just need a text or a phone call saying, man, we really appreciate what you're doing. Because that encouragement from FACs, from the people moving the community forward, sometimes that's a lot more valuable than any check we can write everybody. So your community leaders that are under a lot of stress and are really struggling, this is a prime opportunity to say like, hey, we're there for you, you know, not just financially, but in support also. You know, the key to our success in early childhood, and if you want to talk with me about it, give me an email at andy@mccookany.org. I'd love to talk about some other time about what we're doing in early childhood education, because it's been very successful. But we've gotten a lot of buy-in from the community, and it's been based on years of relationships. You know, when we approach people about our challenges and our issues, it's not been the first conversation. It's people we connect with, people we know, people we understand. And so when we make an ask, you know, they know it's legitimate. When we make a request, they know it's legitimate. And I just want to say is relationship and trust is not a strategy. It's just a part of who we are. And everybody is so busy right now that it's easy to push away that relationship time just to get to the to-do list. But for our communities to move forward, we need these relationships. And really what I see, the FAC is the group that weaves these relationships throughout the community. So Cindy Huff is an amazing example, and I'm thrilled I had a chance to kind of share her opportunity, because I mean, we are the ones that are making dreams happen. And mostly that happens when we welcome other dreams and help make it happen for them. I am complete.
You are awesome, Andy. And thank you for connecting so many people in McCook and now throughout this NCF network. Your expertise is going to become legendary. Thanks, Andy. Kara, I'm looking forward to hearing about our next presenter. I'm complete.
Thank you, Denise. I was gonna say, on the suggestion of Andy, here's my mediocre friend, but that's not fair and not true at all. But sorry. I am happy today to introduce to you guys Tammy Day, who lives here in Norfolk, and she and her family have used their business and the donor advised fund they have there, Daycos for Good, to do some of this work in Norfolk. And again, it's those last two that Tammy's going to talk about: solicit and act on feedback, and skip the formal report and have a conversation instead. So just like you've heard throughout the last hour, conversations are key. And Tammy's a group, they're really great. They do site visits, they do conversations, they do lunches, but I'm gonna let Tammy talk about that. I'll check back in with you guys after that. Tammy, would you like to share with everyone about Daycos?
Sure. Thanks, Kara. I am Tammy Day, Kara's mediocre friend, who now has a very low bar that I have to meet today. So thanks for that. I am here to talk about the last two items, which are solicit and act on feedback and skip the formal report. Briefly, I just want to give you a couple sentences of context. So my husband and I own Daycos in Norfolk, Nebraska. We employ about 60 people here. We work with trucking companies across the United States. And our company has an employee-driven investment approach to our stakeholders. So our employees have created a vision that they carry out about how to make the community better, and how to focus on, improving the lives of their fellow coworkers and their families. And today, I'm going to talk about the work of the Community Investment Committee. That group started probably 4 years ago with a vision and no real experience, which I think was a benefit to them. If you're a more entrenched FAC, you may have to think a little outside the box when we talk about philanthropy at the speed of trust and changing the way you do things. But Daycos has always been about building relationships and reputation for the long term. So this came naturally to our fund advisory committee, our community investment committee, because they, in their work, have always focused on relationships. And I don't think we can solicit people for feedback or get into conversations with them unless we have relationships. So all the conversation previous to me about building those relationships, I think, is where this whole thing hinges. When we build relationships, it makes the work on both sides better. It's easier to find the gaps and to fill them in. I think we can make more impactful investments when we focus on that. And we're ultimately creating a connection, a network of relationships for future investments. So we can't do the other things unless we put those pieces in place. And as Kara said, our group works very hard. We bring nonprofit leaders in to talk to our whole company about what they do. What are the gaps that they see in the community? We go to them, we do field trips, tour their places and learn about what they do. And we're not only gathering information during those times, we're building those relationships that then allow us to be in partnership with them. And I think one thing that sort of illustrates how we solicit feedback once we've started to build these relationships is that the Community Investment Committee hosts a stakeholder luncheon every year, and they invite everyone who has received a grant to attend, and anyone from DACOs who submitted a grant idea, perhaps on behalf of their school or an organization that they care about in our community. And they come together and we spend lunchtime just talking about their experiences with the DACOs for Good application process. What did they like? What didn't they like? They get little cards and they're called AHA cards. And so throughout the lunch, they can write down questions or notes. We also have interaction around those questions. We ask, has anything we've been doing inspired you to do more? Tell us about that. We ask if they have any suggestions for our final report sort of follow-up process. How could we make that better? How can we make things easier for you? And then we ask, what ideas do you have that we should consider? For example, someone said, it'd be really great, this was a teacher, if my students could fill out a grant application. Awesome. So we created a youth application process for the youth to request funds from the DACOs for Good group. And finally, we ask them if they see gaps in the community that are not being filled, because our whole goal is to be in partnership in our community to make an impact, right? Which is what we're all trying to do. But if you don't ask people what they see, it may be something you don't ever see. So an important question to ask. And I know I just have a couple minutes left, but I just want to wrap up and say that I think all of this that we're talking about today, getting feedback, building relationships, is really about redefining philanthropy and making it more relevant to today. And in my opinion, redefining philanthropy means that it's about everyone. It's not about being a funder who sits in their office and waits for people to bring you a piece of paper with an idea on it. And then you use your magic wand and say yes or no, we're going to fund you or not. It's about having conversations with people, building partnerships. It's not transactional, it's relational. And we have to work together in those circumstances to invite people into that process. Because I believe, if we look at philanthropy as more than just money, which to me is sort of the outdated way of viewing things, then we realize that it's about everyone in the community sharing their gifts, sharing their time, talent, treasure to make things better, because our common goal is that our community gets better, right? And the things we care about get better. And so I think philanthropy at the speed of trust to me is a really nice evolution toward a new definition of philanthropy that's more inclusive, and that will, in my opinion, have a broader impact because it's creating connections among lots of people, as opposed to, the historical foundation up on the hill sort of mindset that is kind of scary and unclear and all of those things. So I would just encourage you all to think about the way you do things. At DACOs, we call it blowing something up, but throw all of it out the window and figure out what are the things that we truly care about. Like for us, it's building relationships for the long term. Okay, if that's our tenet and our other purpose is to do good and to be good, how do we align what we're doing with those values? So I would just encourage you to blow it up and figure out how you can have a broader definition of what it means to do good in your communities. Okay, I'm going to stop talking now.
Thank you, Tammy. That was brilliant. And every time we talk about this, we had to run through. I always flash back to my nonprofit days, and my brain explodes, because if we put this into motion, we are going to unleash so much abundance in our communities, right? Because if our nonprofits are not figuring out how to get their stuff into a box so it fits so they can get more funding, but they're thinking about how can I make my community great, I mean, our impact is going to just explode. So thank you for that, Tammy. Thank you for everyone. We are going to ask you guys to go ahead now and in your chat box, type out what you've been inspired by today. What has inspired you today? And what are you going to take back to your FAC? Right? Is it a time bomb? I'm going to take a bomb back to my FAC, because we're going to change this up. We're going to get rid of our whatever, or we're going to add this. What piece would you like to see in your FAC? It's going to change your grant making and thus your community.
Thanks, Kara. So everyone, just continue to put in what inspired you, or what you'd like to take back, or what takeaway you had from today's session in the chat box. We'd love to capture those. I did see some questions in the chat earlier that one was for Tammy. And so I thought, while we still had you here, Tammy, we'd go ahead and ask that. We have a few more minutes in our session here, but the question was about your employees, Tammy, and if you have seen a change because of the granting and their involvement in that granting in the community. Have you seen any change in your employees and their community, I guess, involvement total?
Yeah, great question. You saved me from typing out an answer. And if you want more information, I can certainly love to talk to someone more about it. But yes, and I really think it's because this whole thing is driven by our employees and their connections to the community are actual real connections. They're not like DACO's giving out money and then saying it's everyone's thing. Like, they are doing the thing. Like, they made the thing, they're doing the thing. I just try to really get out of their way, which we heard about earlier. And so our satisfaction rates are up. We survey our employees to death. So up from the 70s, probably 4 years ago, into the 90s, directly tied to the work we're doing with DACO's for Good. We have a hiring list of over 200 people who want to work at DACO's and have said, please tell me when you have an opening. Most of them don't even know what we do. We get about 90 applications for every opening we have. And people say, hey, I've heard about the awesome stuff your employees do here. So that's a difference. We have seen people take on additional leadership roles within the company. People, the first time it happened, I was like, what is going on here? Like, I couldn't figure out what's happening, but it was that sense of ownership that they had cultivated. And I think an awareness of the importance of what they were doing and how it impacts the community. And then we've also seen an increase in people participating in service clubs, volunteering, taking their kids to volunteer, and serving on boards. We've had some people for the first time trying to figure out how do they serve in their community. So I could do a whole session on this sometime if you would like to hear about it. Otherwise, please reach out to me. As you can tell, I'm very passionate about this sort of business doing good things. So would love to talk with anyone who's interested. But great question. Thanks, Dina.
Thanks, Tammy. We're going to take you up on that because I think there's lots of messages in the chat that people are interested in the model that DACO's is providing. So we'll get back to that. But Steve brought up another point way in the beginning of this session that I think is important for us to just address, because the question is, how, well, I don't have it right in front of me, but the question was about granting subcommittees and delegating the grant making to a grant subcommittee and not the complete FAC. And I know there are several of our affiliated funds who utilize granting committees. And I will just say that NCF is just like all of you, and we are evolving, and we are developing and learning new ideas and new ways. And I would just say that, you know, many of you had started your grant committees a long time ago, and grant committees are not a bad thing. There are reasons for a grant committee. I think just like any committee is, it's a way to get others to start just on a smaller scale, learning what you do and who you are, and maybe cultivating future FAC members, and maybe broadening the number of people involved in the process. And so there's lots of positives about committee work. So I'm not saying that grant committees are not a good thing, but I will say the most important work that affiliated funds do in our communities is make grants. And because they make impact and they help move our communities forward. And if you're delegating that responsibility to non-FAC members or to just a small version of your FAC, you're kind of handicapping yourself because you're not involving the full group of people who have this understanding of the ABCD approach to community development. So if you are using granting committees, which is a perfectly good way of delegating out some of the investigative work. But what we've been suggesting in this entire session is that it shouldn't be work, because you should already be aware as a community about what's going on. I mean, as an organization, about what's going on in your community. And you should have been already having some conversations with the people who are asking you for money and knowing the ideas and the programs that they're doing. And so it shouldn't be a lot of extra work, because it's constant conversations and relationship building that you're doing. But if you are having a grant committee and they're really digging deep into talking about the grant, and if it's actually something that you would like to support as an organization, then for sure, make sure to have that deep conversation at the FAC level too. We just don't want some of your affiliated fund members to feel like they're a rubber stamp, and that, and we know that they trust the members on your granting committee and understand if they've done their homework and they feel good about it, it's probably a good thing. But it's really important to include your entire FAC in that decision process, because they have relationships and they have perspectives and they know a lot about the community too, and it just broadens the more people you have involved in that process. So I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I don't want anyone to walk away thinking that we've totally changed our mind on grant subcommittees. But what we are saying is granting is the future. It is the most important thing that your FAC does. And so we want as many of the voices of your committee to be involved with that. So are there any other questions? We have a few minutes and we'd be happy to take any questions for any of our great panelists today. Any more in the chat box? I'm looking. Some great comments here.
Hey, Christine, this is Jeff.
Yes.
Good afternoon, everybody. And I have a question for our panelists and anybody else that wants to weigh in on it. But what we've articulated in the NCF strategic framework is we're really hoping that money in NCF affiliated funds, especially unrestricted endowments, is granted to be used to create change that otherwise may not occur. And what are some of the things that all of you are learning in terms of how to figure out what that is?
Well, I'm sure there'll be better answers after mine, but I'll tell you, 2 years ago, when I went to Norfolk, I mean, it really seeped into my blood what NCF and the FACs are doing. Because I mean, if you looked at the communities that were moving forward, it was the FAC and the relationships, the connections, and the vision that those groups had. You know, looking at communities like Pender and what they were doing. I mean, that FAC is playing a leading role. Because if you look, our institutions are good, but our cities, our counties, our schools, the way they're structured is to manage the resources they have. And they have a lot of resources in our community. The community moving forward is the FAC, and sometimes it's not even the money, but the idea that they're pushing communities and schools and counties to think differently And that inspiration from the FAC is what's causing communities to think differently and think bigger when they're doing infrastructure and new community facilities. It's making schools think differently about how they offer career and technical education, but it's that FAC pushing these organizations to do things bigger than they thought they could.
This is Pam. I think in Keith County, for us, that impact piece, we're obviously still working through that because we have more questions than answers at this point, quite frankly. But some of the things that we have been able to impact just in the last year and a half is just asking those entities that come to us with grant requests to think bigger. To think differently, dream, how can we help you connect dots in other areas in the community to make impact? For example, our historical society came to us for a relatively small grant last year. However, the impact that would have would be huge. What's your big dream for this piece, for the historical society? And who are people that would be interested in that? A year later, our regional director, Jana, just facilitated a community gathering for that piece, allowing people to dream big and hearing, once again, hearing their thoughts on what that could develop into. And there was a lot of passion in that room. I mean, people were pretty excited. So, and there were, again, wayfinding in our community was part of that as well. You know, our curb appeal, our revitalization, attracting people to all other sectors of the community were some of those dots that were connected. Anyway, that's just an example of some of the impact pieces that we're working through grant by grant.
I know Troy is too humble and kind to talk about Eustace, because that is the way his mom raised him. And that's really how so many of our FAC members are. But from somebody who sees their work that they do from the outside, is that it is so impressive to see a first-year fund advisory committee member share, I heard this, I talked to so-and-so, and lift up, and it's all accepted. It's not, oh, you haven't been on long enough. It really changes things by them not requiring you to have an application. And a lot of times they're going to places and saying there was a beautification effort that just was, somebody wasn't taking care of things. How are we going to solve this? And different people in the community were talking, and they just make it happen because they want to see things get done. A lot of times it's not even the most money coming from their fund advisory committee, but sometimes I think that those new FAC members are lifted up, and that's part of their leadership development that they don't have written down. That it's just the culture of the Eustis Area Fund Advisory Committee that everybody gets to speak and everybody is important. And I think it's incredible work. And again, 401 people, and they've raised almost $1 million in the last 4 years. They do it well. Way to go.
Thanks, Denise. That's a great point. Well, all of our panelists have been fantastic examples of this work. This trust-based philanthropy is something we've been talking about in our ABCD work for a long time. We have just rolled out something called impact planning, which I just want to share with all of you if you're not for sure what that is. It's all of these concepts that we've addressed today and how we can build relationships and help partner in our community to use our granting dollars in a way that we can make significant impact. And so if you have any interest in learning more about any of the topics that we talked about, these 7 different ways that you can increase trust in your grant making, or just the data piece where you can, one of the outcomes of impact planning is to have that at a glance piece that we've shared with you from Keith County. Those are all pieces of impact planning. So my little commercial for you is, we are all evolving together, and this is the next step. And we'd love to share in more detail with your affiliated funds if this is something you're interested in. So reach out with your coordinator, and even if there's just pieces of it that you're interested in, we understand it's a lot, and we don't even expect all of it to be digested at once. We know that there's a lot more discussion, and you can take baby steps and go at your pace, and use what works for your community, because every community is different. So thanks for joining us today.